Great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's exciting to talk to you about this topic that's certainly near and dear to my heart. So much so that many, many years ago, I was asked to give a vision of how AI will permeate our lives. And one of the things that was quite puzzling to me is why did I still have remote control to operate my television? And so I had told this magazine that I should be able to just talk to my television and tell it to turn on the news or to turn on a documentary. Um, and I was very puzzled and perturbed when I noticed that they slapped on the cover America in 2025. Now, the reason why I was perturbed is because we already had these things prototyped in our laboratory. And I know it's very difficult for all of you there to see the title of when this magazine cover came out, but in the bottom far left of the corner, it says 2005. And so that's how early on we were thinking about these innovations. So as introduced, me and my team have been working on AI for a very, very long time, right? So at IBM, we were inventing some of the first ever speech-enabled web browsers. We were thinking about bringing speech to the Sony set-top box, the PlayStation, and when they were not ready to commercialize AI, I had departed. I received venture capital funding, and I ended up creating what was the first at its time AI cloud company. We had dozens of enterprise and carrier customers. For example, Microsoft was a customer, Sprint was a customer. And when we were raising our next venture capital round with Telefonica and Nokia and several other major brands that you would certainly be aware of, that's when Amazon, Google, and several other parties came to acquire our company. And from that was born everything that people now know as Alexa, the Amazon Echo experience, and whatnot. And it really helped bring AI to everybody, certainly in their homes. And so for our next trick, Pryon, the company name that I currently founded, was the code name of the engine that we used that became Alexa. So why are you here? Well, the reason why you're here, because it's no longer about digital transformation, it's all about AI transformation. Now, why do you have to transform your businesses and organizations and agencies to be AI powered? Well, part of it is just the influence from all of these business magazines. There's not a day when you pick up a newspaper or open up a magazine or read some website where they're not telling you about the different uses and the business cases that could be driven by AI. And so you almost feel forced into adopting AI. But I present to you a different view, one that you have to be careful of. If you actually look at what ended up happening to a great many companies when the S&P 500 index, stock index, was first created, almost 90% of those companies were eradicated. They disappeared. They went out of business. The workers lost their jobs. And the reason for that is because they couldn't keep up with the pace of innovation. And so that's why it's actually important to understand what this transition means and how you can benefit from it and adopt it in your own things. Otherwise, we don't want your businesses to end up like these brands that aren't in the forefront of day-to-day use anymore. Now, let's talk about the history of technology, though. What were all those things that happened that essentially disrupted many of those businesses? Well, I don't know about you, but many of us got our start in computing because of one major thing that happened that gave us the dawn of the information age. Because you see, in the past, only the biggest of government agencies, only the biggest of universities, only the biggest of corporations could afford to adopt mainframe technologies and the centralized computing model that existed around it. And yet it took Bill Gates that did what? You know, they made computing more accessible to us all by dropping a personal computing on each of our desktops. And Steve Jobs certainly did that by putting a mobile device in each of our hands. And it's through that accessibility that allowed the innovation age to blossom. And so we were able to go, from screens like this that, as you can tell, are not very easy to use. Even somebody like me would squint to understand all of these themes in there. By the way, this is a console of a legacy Cray supercomputer. And so now we have these forms of document experiences, right, with our nice colorful icons and music and pictures and videos and what have you. And then it's a lot easier for us as natural humans to interface with machines now. And so we're at the mainframe era of the artificial intelligence age, and that's okay, right? That's normal. That typically happens whenever there's a new piece of innovation, that it tends to be concentrated as the large tech companies figure out what this means, and as the large entities, whether it's government agencies, again, academic institutions, and large corporates figure out these innovations. Now, what does that mean though? Very few of them can afford the mess of resources that are necessary to do this. And so you hear these hyperscalers have TPUs and GPUs and all sorts of exotic AI accelerations in their data centers. And they certainly have benefited from the first wave of AI-based computing to benefit their own businesses and show you recommendations and show you the best ads and all of these things that are driving their business models. And not only the machinery of it, but it requires data scientists and people that have specialized knowledge that aren't permeated throughout the organizations. Now, as I mentioned, many of them tended to be consumer-centric companies. And so what they did is they focused on selling more product to homes, driving more ads, to our mobile screens. And so these things have been are part of the home infrastructure, but there are also toys as well in many ways that you see DeepMind and you see Watson and things like that playing these games, again, because it's a way of having a cumbersome piece of technology, essentially figuring out the margins of what it can do. Now, we're in an exciting transition because we firmly believe that this is coming to us all, and certainly in our homes, certainly in our workplaces, and certainly in through our respective societies and educational institutions. And we do believe it's going to drive tremendous productivity increases for us all, because I think all of you will admit the number of decisions we make on a day-to-day basis that affect our careers is high, and we do it with imperfect information. Now, many of you are worried though, right? Whenever you hear about artificial intelligence, there's always all these thought leaders that appear and different people working in academia and in government agencies and in these big businesses. And we're all talking about these themes like, well, what does this mean for me? Am I really worried about, losing my job in the concept of this being adopted? So you hear a lot of these things with autonomous vehicles and what have you. Does this replace driving and pilots and things of that sort? But in reality, I think it just increases different types of jobs, right? In terms of producing, if we have to replace all of these vehicles in the road to have some things that are more automated, I think it just opens up alternate opportunities for jobs and reskilling of the folks that would typically do one thing end up doing something else, and the net safety for our entire environment goes up by having more of these automated systems in play. The second thing that you hear as a theme that you worry about when we think about how do we take AI to all is the concept of explainability. Well, can we explain why the AI gave us a certain answer? And so there's a lot of research, around this topic as well. And we're always faced with this conundrum, right? If an AI can't explain itself, is it useful or not? Well, if you just happen to be the patient and you're getting care for, some sort of, God forbid, cancer or tumor, I get, FDA and regulatory things that need to make sure that there's no garbage in, garbage out, that there's a proper path between the A and B of the problem and the solution. But in many ways, I mean, with these neural networks and deep learning and what have you, it's hard to even say why they work in terms of their pattern matching, but their outcomes are sound. But at the same time, I do believe there's a way forward for that as well. When we talk about privacy, Obviously, there's not a day that go by when we start figuring out all of these cameras that are out there. What does that mean for us as citizens in our respective societies? At the same time, I will say there's positive uses of this type of technologies. For instance, there's a company that's using these cameras so that when it sees a car driven by a family and there's a large truck behind them, it actually uses computer vision to keep the light green. Why? Because families tend to, if they get a yellow light, they tend to actually slow down. And if there just happens to be a truck, it actually will crash right into them because that larger vehicle doesn't have enough time to stop. And so they found that they could vastly decrease the number of accidents just by looking down the road, seeing a small car followed by a big truck, leaving the light green, letting both of them pass, and then switching the lights to have more of an adapted view of that. And so what I'm sharing with you is when you build a hammer, there's two different ways that it can be leveraged. And lastly, and this is only positive, I have to say, is accessibility. To open up, the ability for AI to help, some folks that you would have normally not had in a job market and not been the benefit of their innovation. I know we made an announcement with another, K4 Connect Intel Capital backed company where they're helping, give coronavirus related information to caregivers. And also, I'm really excited by the story and inspired by the story of Brooke Ellison, who was the first ever handicapped graduate of the Ivy League. And yet she would have, her amazing mind would have never been able to join us, in the working world had these types of technologies not benefited her. And in fact, I have to say, many of the AI technologies that we now take for granted, whether it was IBM research or Google research or otherwise, were started with heart, with many people being interested in the accessibility topic and figuring out how to make technology more useful to many others. And so I am painting a different picture here. I'm not painting an antagonistic picture with this technology joining us. I'm actually painting one where it will actually benefit our respective job types, whether we're in offices and using these technologies in order to get better insights, right? So for instance, I'll give you some use cases of how people are leveraging our work. When you have to do due diligence, right, before you invest in something, right? How is this done today? Well, it's done by people sharing folders of documents and things of that sort. And they have to quickly look through all of them and to find the needles in the haystack. Instead, with the technologies that we're working on, we can fuse together open source knowledge, essentially things that are publicly accessible to the entire world, commercial knowledge, things that these financial services entities have to license from different entities, and then also proprietary knowledge, things that only you as an organization know, merge them all together into a single AI, and then start interacting with the AI in order to accomplish the workflow. This is going to allow you to uncover needles in the haystack, to see non-obvious object associations, and be a lot more efficient. Now, from your standpoint, when I said, oh, you can just take one folder and start reading through it, I'm sure many of you said, well, this doesn't seem very difficult. I can take one folder worth of content and read through them over the course of a day or a week. But what if you had to do this for 10,000 securities every quarter, before your fund managers can actually make a decision? Now you can start seeing the scale of the problem. What if you're a cybersecurity company, right? And you provide these checklists to make sure that all the suppliers feeding a particular large entity are all secure. But those environments keep changing. They upgrade to new versions of software. All of these other things are happening. They want, as these changes happen, for AIs to alert them, from a threat intelligence standpoint. And I already mentioned, some of the examples in in medical fields, and I'll go into that some further. Other uses of in office scenarios, think RFPs, right? So all of these documents that live in these organizations, the fact that you can use previous ones in order to fill out new ones, all sorts of help desk scenarios. So instead of putting customers on hold, for 2 minutes while we speed read knowledge base articles, instead we can talk to the AI in terms of, hey, how would you solve this particular problem? And you can actually end up doubling the number of phone calls that you can run through your contact center there if you so choose, or let the AI handle the ones that you would consider second level of support, and then fall back to humans for third line of support. So there's just a myriad of use cases that we're really excited in the office space. Now in medicine, obviously AI has come to work, in trying to help us with the coronavirus by reading all of the papers that were ever written relating to the topic, and allowing researchers more efficient access to the literature as they were doing their work. Not only that, they were also looking for things that had already been cleared in the past, that already went through human trials and what have you, that were already out there in production, to see if they had any efficacy for solving this virus. The previous example that I mentioned in terms of having just-in-time information for caregivers, so that they can be up to date with the changing regulations and therapies and things like that, that's also exciting. And in large scale industrial use cases, right? We have a customer that's using this to ingest all manners of safety related information, all sorts of mechanical guides and things of that sort. And it doesn't matter if you're dealing with a paper factory or an oil well, you have the latest information in there. Not only that, it's also working with some of your most senior and knowledgeable personnel, capturing the tacit and tribal knowledge that they have, because as you have a younger workforce coming in, how are they going to learn the 30 years of experience that a veteran industrial worker had? Well, it's only through this type of cross-training. And so I'm really excited about the blending of humans and machines together, working together in augmented intelligence. So not replacing humans at work, but giving them deeper capabilities and insights so they can do more efficient work and smarter work as well, in order to perform their workflows. And so that's why we've been working on this for quite a while, so that we can merge all of the enterprise content under a single natural language interface, because natural language is the only way that humans really interact with each other, whether it's spoken or written word. We believe there's no other API to connect a human to a machine, and then have a system that essentially learns and grows over time. So that's what we're fixated on. I really appreciate this time today and opportunity to speak with you. And please find me on Twitter or any other, or connect to me on LinkedIn, and we can continue our conversation. Thanks so much.